So what's going on in Syria? We've seen battles take place between Bedouin Arabs with Druze militias in the southern area of Syria called Suwayda. We've seen Syrian forces under al-Sharaa being targeted by Israel, including the ministry buildings in Damascus. Across social media, we've seen also the Zionist bots in overload claiming that there's a genocide taking place against the Druze by those aligned with al-Sharaa. Inshallah, I want to give you, as best as we can, accurate, unbiased information on the current situation and explain why Israel seems so concerned about the Druze minority in Syria.
The situation in Sweida, the situation in southwestern Syria, is very serious. The IDF is operating, the Air Force is operating, other forces are operating. We are acting to save our Druze brothers and to eliminate the regime's gangs.
After a spate of kidnappings and robberies that took place in and around Suwayda, which was blamed initially on Druze militias against Sunni majority population, Sunni Bedouin Arabs began engaging in clashes with various Druze militias. Syrian forces were then sent out by al-Sharaa to quell and end the fighting. They also demanded that the Druze militias lay down their weapons and integrate their forces into the Syrian National Army. However, Israel began targeting Syrian tanks, claiming they were protecting the Druze from an impending massacre. Israel also targeted the Ministry of Defense building in Damascus and threatened to escalate their attacks if al-Sharaa didn't succumb to their demands of withdrawing their troops from Sweida in Syria. In addition, Israeli Druze fighters crossed over from Israel and the Golan to join the fight against the Syrian forces and Bedouin Arabs. Prior to entering Sweida, the Syrian government had actually notified Israel and assured Israel that the operation was not directed at Israeli interests. Even then, Israel still attacked Syrian forces. Then we had US Special Envoy for Syria Tom Barrack that held several calls with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's senior advisors to press for de-escalation. Al-Sharaa gave a televised address in response to the ongoing Israeli bombardment. In that televised address on Thursday, he said, al-Sharaa, that either the nation faces two options, either open war with Israel at the expense of our Druze citizens, or allowing Druze clerics to return to reason and put their national interests first. It's a very surprising way to put things. As we know, this isn't the first time Israel has attacked Syria. After the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, many of the munitions factories and Syrian armory was targeted and destroyed by Israel. So we know that Israel has been consistently attacking various targets within Israel over or since Bashar al-Assad has been removed. The US then intervened diplomatically. Washington pressured the Syrian government to pull its forces out of Suwayda and to agree a ceasefire with the Druze factions. The White House also contacted Israeli officials, urging them to halt further airstrikes. Despite this, Israel has stepped up the threats against the Syrian regime. The Israeli Defense Minister Katz declared that the army will continue to attack regime forces until they withdraw from the area and will soon raise the bar of response if the message is not understood. Syrian forces withdrew from Suwayda, and after more clashes between Bedouin Arabs and Druze forces, they negotiated a ceasefire with the Bedouin Arabs to not enter Suwayda. So why is Israel concerned about the Druze? To understand that, we need to understand a little bit of the history of the Druze. They are a secret religious cult that developed as an offshoot from Ismailism in the 11th century. They don't consider themselves as Muslims and have a hodgepodge of different beliefs mixing Christianity, Neoplatonism, Ismailism and even a bit of Islam too. After being persecuted by the Ismailis in Egypt, they fled to the mountainous areas around the Levant, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine and now parts of Jordan. They only number around 1 million. They don't even allow their own members, members of the Druze community, to know what their beliefs are unless they've been initiated. You cannot convert into the Druze, and they don't even allow mixed marriages. However, they have a history of pretending to be other religions, hiding their real beliefs when mixing with other people's, people of different religions. They've had a complex history amongst the Muslims and various Islamic leaders, but by and large, they were allowed to govern themselves in their semi-autonomous regions so long as they continued to pay their taxes. However, during Britain's and France's colonial era, they used these types of minorities, the Alawites, Maronite Christians, and the Druze to infiltrate the Muslim lands and use these groups to cause instability in the Muslim world. Joseph Massad in his book Islam and Liberalism quotes Cara Devaux, a French academic at the Catholic Institute in 1901, who proposed that we should split the Mohammedan world, break its moral unity, taking advantage of the political and ethnic divisions that already exist in it. We should accentuate these differences among the diverse Mohammedan races in such a way as to increase nationalistic sentiments and diminish those of religious communitarianism. So it's very clear that the French and the British colonialists, they looked at these ethnic minorities as fault lines, as a way to divide and infiltrate and create instability in the heart of the Muslim world. And at various times, the Druze aligned themselves with the French and later with the British. When the British agitated the Druze against the French colonial rule and specifically against the French-backed Maronite Christians, the Druze were also involved in rebelling against the Ottoman Caliphate too. The point is that these ethnic minorities have been used as access points to interfere in Muslim lands. So just like the French used the Alawites and the Maronite Christians in the Levant, similarly the Druze are also being used again, this time by the Israel. There's approximately 125,000 Druze in Israel, or historic Palestine, and have been extensively used within the IDF, the Israeli Offensive Force. They are useful to the Zionists, as they are ethnically Arab speakers who largely have no loyalty to Palestinians and have had their tumultuous relationship with Islam and other Muslims. So what is Israel's real game with the Druze? Here's a map of the region. As I've mentioned in previous videos, Israel's key strategic weakness is the lack of strategic depth, a small country whose critical infrastructure is exposed to attack. The Greater Israel policy is less about returning to the claimed biblical promised land, but more about creating this strategic depth. With Egypt securing Israel's border at the Rafah checkpoint, and with Jordan being a defensive position for Israel using its skies and territory to protect Israel, Israel is attempting to secure land in southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River. It has already taken the Golan Heights, which is a strategic buffer zone and which also has a sizable Druze population, with the strategically important Sweida region, which is a mountainous region in the south of Syria and majority Druze area. Israel wants to create an autonomous region, or even a region that's directly under Israel's control, like the Golan. Israel is basically trying to expand its buffer zone to build its strategic depth, as you can see. Remember, Israel isn't about cooperation or partnership with other Arab countries in the region. It wants total, unmatched dominance in the region. It also knows that America is withdrawing its military presence within the region. America wants to normalize relations with Arab states with Israel. This means that Israel's borders will be fixed once it agrees to normalization with Syria, Lebanon, Saudi, etc. Therefore, it sees a window of opportunity, Israel does. Take ever more land, redraw the map of the region before it's forced to accept its borders it currently has, or at the very least create pliant regimes that will be buffer zones for Zionist interests, like an Alawi or a Druze enclave, either fully autonomous or semi-autonomous regions that will side itself with Israel. Thus, Israel is perfectly fine with Arab Bedouins and Druze militia undertaking massacres against each other. In fact, Israel allowed Druze, Israeli Druze that is, to cross over to Syria from the Golan to directly stoke up tensions amongst the Arabs and Syrians with the Druze population. But what Israel doesn't want is the integration of the Druze into Syria or the Syrian army, hence why it bombed Syrian forces but did very little against the Bedouin Arab militias. So is al-Sharaa then in a no-win situation? You see, he's attempting to maintain the integrity of Syria while Israel has an active policy to break it up. He wants to integrate the Druze, Alawites, Christians, the majority Muslim population into a Syrian national identity. He wants to integrate the various militias into the Syrian national army and take full authority over the country. However, the problem is that although he's the most powerful leader in Syria at the moment, he's one amongst a number of different leaders in Syria, each of which have their own militias, whether that's militias still outside his direct control, whether that's Kurdish militias in the north or Alawites, Bedouins and Druze militias who have still the capacity and capability to undertake violent actions independent of al-Sharaa's control. It therefore weakens his position. The fundamental problem al-Shara has is his attempt to operate within the framework that was ultimately created by the West and by the European colonial powers. You see, Syria is a modern state, has existed for less than 100 years. It was born from the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The French attempted to construct a national identity from the disparate groups of ethnicities and religions that existed within Syria. And that's a problem. You see, the problem is that the raison d'etre of nation states is that a state arises when you have a particular people who share a, similar ethnicity, language, history upon a particular land or region. So therefore, the argument that Syria has a unique group of people who share a common ancestry, common language, a common, ethnicity, and therefore have a right to a nation state. Therefore, we're not Syrians, but rather a separate entity that requires a separate nation state. Similarly, the Alawis could argue the same things, the Druze could argue the same things, even the Christians within the region. Each one would claim that they are distinct from the other and therefore claim the right to have a nation state. See, nationalism, rather than being a basis of unity, will always fracture into different groups and peoples competing for their own national identity. This is the problem. And this is particularly the case when outside powers like Israel or America or the West in the past are attempting to constantly agitate what they call the balkanization of your country. Even if we look to the birth of nation states across Europe, this took place over centuries, not within a few decades. And those were over centuries of conflicts. And that's even without outside powers, powerful states wanting to keep your particular country weak and divided. So this is what happened in regards to the West. Britain, England, France, Germany, they constructed themselves over centuries, developing, undertaking wars and battles, and therefore forming the various agreements that they created in terms of their nation states. To expect then that Syria can follow the same path, importing artificial European Enlightenment ideas to create and construct a national identity that supersedes any other identity, would therefore be a mistake. The way forward isn't to appeal to a national identity, which was originally created by the colonialists, but the revolution should have continued and incorporated other Arab lands and looked for unity on a basis other than claiming that they have some sort of shared national identity and shared regional thinking or ethnicity that's based upon a particular geography. Remember, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Hijaz were originally one land under an Islamic leadership. Minorities were largely protected. The fact that the Druze, who have no converts, continued their presence in Muslim lands for 1,000 years indicates they weren't wiped out under Islamic rules. You see, Islamic rule didn't need minorities to give up their religion, but simply accept the authority of the Islamic government, and they could adhere to their own particular identity and religious practices and behaviors. What I'm trying to explain is that when you look at the idea of a Syrian national identity, this is an artificial construct. The idea that there is a specific group of people that call themselves Syrian, when the very idea of Syria was created and manufactured by the West, by the French in particular. Now, I know it may seem like a radical suggestion, bringing about a revolution and spreading the revolution beyond the Syrian borders, bringing about unity of Jordan and Egypt, and bringing back this unity under an Islamic rulership. But remember, for 3 years, Syria and Egypt were actually considered at one point one country. So it's not unheard of. This was from 1967 to 1970 before Assad came to power. At that time, the idea of unity was under this Arab nationalist idea, and therefore is bound to fail, not under an Islamic pretext. But also note, we're living in unprecedented times. We're seeing Israel intervening and bombing across the region, whether that's Iran or Lebanon or Syria. It's going beyond the quote unquote nation state borders, and it's doing so in order to redraw the map. It has no problems in having radical solutions looking beyond the status quo. We also know America and the West similarly believe it has the right to bomb any nation state. They don't respect borders. They don't respect the idea of sovereignty of another nation state. In fact, they don't respect the borders that they themselves created in the Muslim lands. So why do we? It seems that the only ones that adheres to the colonialist borders are the Muslims themselves, who are clearly disadvantaged by these borders. Secondly, the real basis for unity for the Muslims, not just in Syria, not just amongst the Arabs and the Kurds, but also Egypt, Jordan and elsewhere, the real basis is Islam. Muslims are waiting for a leadership that takes decisive actions, looks beyond the status quo that has been created by the West. Look, I really honestly believe that if work was done to continue the revolution, to spread it to Jordan and Egypt from Syria, that this would be largely supported by the Muslims of the region, who are sick and tired of the Zionist supporting leaders that control their lands. This is, as I said, unprecedented times. The opportunity to act and redraw the Muslim world is actually now. It's also what America and the Zionists fear the most. That's why America in particular has attempted to court Ahmed al-Sharaa by bringing him into the international order, by limiting the revolution to Syria alone, by using the threat of breakup, by using the minority groups. They've curtailed, in fact prevented any real significant change in the regional order of the Middle East. That means maintaining American hegemony and Zionist dominance within the region. Sadly, Ahmed al-Sharaa's path hasn't changed or challenged this. Rather, it seeks to appease the West by demonstrating they're not a threat to the interest and dominance that they have within the region. They're not a threat to try to redraw and change the regional map within the region, to call for unity, work outside the Western dominant global order in the Muslim world. But by continuing to play their game, he, Ahmed al-Sharaa, operates by their rules, the rules set by Western global powers. And these rules are meant to keep the Muslim world weak and unable to realize its true potential. And this unity under Islam isn't just another national identity. I'm not saying that, we're Muslims, we need a state. No, it's not just another national identity. Rather, Islamic unity is unity under an Islamic system, a system that provides solutions on how to govern and solve problems for, all people, whether Muslims or not. So what I'm saying is this: Ahmed al-Sharaa has limited his options, has become at least unwittingly a pawn for other agendas because he's decided to follow the same old trodden path of nationalism and adhering to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. We've got over 100 years of failure in regards to this approach. Yes, I get it. Syria lacks resources, suffers from poverty, lacks sophisticated weapons and capable population that is able to sustain a true Islamic leadership. There are huge issues, but that's why Syria needs to look beyond its borders, look to establish real unity to surrounding states and dissolve the borders that exist between itself and other Arab Muslim countries. This is what Arab leaders fear the most. This is what Bashar al-Assad, when he was removed, this is what they feared, that they would be next. And this is what Syria needs to do: push for regional change, push for political unity, and then they are in potential to bring about real Islamic governance, utilizing resources of countries like Jordan and Egypt and potentially expand into the Gulf countries. It's a massive challenge. I get it, but 500,000 Syrians sacrificed their life for justice against the tyrant. There's no half measures when you undertake those types of actions. Complete the revolution, bring about real change, and the problems of minorities seeking autonomy or breaking away becomes less of a threat. Radical, I know, but it's the only path that I see as a legitimate path for Syria. Otherwise, they just operate according to Western standards, which is there to keep them dominated and there to keep the dominance of Zionist and Western hegemony within the region.